Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 21st. That sounded upbeat. Wow, hey! I don't know. It's Friday. I mean, I guess we're glad for that. I'm a lot more tired than I let on right there. But okay, let's just keep up the illusion and just say we're high energy all day long. We are actually on the air today. I actually figured that out. By the way, we were on the air the whole time. And yeah, what I figured out like an hour later. Oh, yeah, okay, right. He's doing the Cheech and Chong thing because 420. I'm not that in touch with that whole celebrating 420 thing. But hey, I got you now. And so we were on the whole time. Everybody assured me. I got thumbs up from everybody. And even Justice tried to reassure me everything was fine. But I refused to believe it. And then it became, now it's just a comedy bit on its own. It's not very funny, actually. It doesn't stand up to the long-time classic that he was referring to. But everything was fine yesterday, so that's great. And you know what? That's it. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. The news is great. Go home. Have a good day. You're probably already home. And, well, okay. Why don't I concentrate on ruining part of your day by telling you bad news about the way things are running around the country. And, maybe there'll be some good news in it too. I mean, the good news is bad news, usually. I mean, I guess for Democrats in a way, right? It's good news to find out bad news because bad news then comes to light and transparency and you do something about it. And that's good. And whereas the Republican approach to things is to try to cover up as much bad news as possible. Maybe that's one of the fundamental differences between us that are only now occurring to me. Okay. One of the ones that are now. Yeah, okay. All right. Just want to make sure I had everything matched up correctly. All right. We dive right in today because it's Friday and I don't expect anybody to come riding to the rescue, but I do want to remember that I actually have someone riding to the rescue. Rosalind McGregor, as usual, riding to the rescue with some news about what's going on in Michigan. So I guess today's theme is, here are some states where things are going either wrong or at least poorly for Republicans, which is not a bad thing necessarily. And then some other stuff because it's Friday. Now there's a lot to catch up on, and a lot of places where things are going poorly. Let's start in Tennessee, where they're terrible. You know, we have some friends in Tennessee, and remember there are blue spots, if not regions, at least people, embedded in every red state. You can't cut them off and leave them there to fend for themselves. But we start today in Tennessee because, focus has been on Tennessee for quite a while since they had made their attempt, and I guess it's now just an attempt to expel the three. They keep calling them Tennessee 3, even though only 2 of them got expelled. The Tennessee legislators whom they expelled and one whom they came close to expelling for taking up a anti-gun protest on the House floor. They were, of course, reinstated by local authorities, not by the legislature. Meanwhile, that became a national story. They did themselves some tremendous damage there, and I guess I welcome it. But this came to my attention just recently. Actually, when I say just recently, I mean like this morning. But now I'm seeing articles and coverage about it all over the place, including, of course, at the front page of Daily Kos. Actually came to my attention from Heather Cox Richardson's Substack written yesterday, which caught my eye this morning. She actually has, a great litany, a roundup, if you will, from around the country of all the various things that are all pointing to, either the implosion of the country or just the implosion of the Republican Party, or neither, just more trouble. But to concentrate on this specific incident, I have seen a thread this morning on Mastodon from, Michelangelo Signorelli who put this out? I think so. But anyway, he grabbed this local news article to tell the story and then added commentary on it. I bet our commentary will overlap. So rather than read his, let's read the story and do our own. It's going to be pretty much the same. So here's the news from News Channel 5, not News Channel 4 or 3. We went all the way to 5 on this one. Nashville revealed GOP leader, you know how they like to pretend that's GOP, but it's GOP. GOP leader who voted to expel the Tennessee Three resigns. Why? He was found guilty of sexually harassing interns. And we kind of knew this. We just didn't know which one it was and what the details of the harassment were. That now has come to light. But as they were getting set to expel the Tennessee 2 and try to expel the Tennessee 3rd, right along with the other two, one or another of them actually spoke to this issue on the floor in their own defense and said, we know that there's a member of this house who's been credibly accused and maybe even found guilty at that point of sexually harassing interns. And we're not expelling that guy. Well, now they don't have to because he's resigned. The expulsion is, would have been, I think, the natural culmination of the whole thing. And he's resigned because it looked an awful lot like the legislature was going to expel him otherwise. Although maybe he thought his local authorities would reinstate him if he was expelled. Anyway, here's the deal. We now know who it is. Representative Scotty Campbell, who has resigned about 6 hours after News Channel 5 confronted him about sexual harassment allegations. All right, well, let's see what's up here. The reporter in the piece is Phil Williams. There's some video of him, walking up to the guy on the street and saying, hey, what about this? Haven't you been caught doing this? And appears like he's giving the usual song and dance about, no, you have it all wrong. But then he went and resigned. He also looks pretty much exactly what you are thinking of for whatever reason. Okay, well, let me read you the story. A member of the GOP leadership, I didn't realize he was leadership, in the Tennessee House of Representatives was recently found guilty of sexually harassing at least one legislative intern, likely two. This by an ethics committee acting in secret. News Channel 5 investigates, has learned. I love the way television news channels label their investigative product. We have a department. It's an investigative news department. What do you call it? We call it Channel 5 News Investigates. I love that. And Channel 95 on your side or whatever, stuff like that. Anyway, about 6 hours after being confronted by News Channel 5 Investigates, Representative Scotty Campbell gave up his seat in the Tennessee General Assembly. So good job there, News Channel 5, or at least News Channel 5 Investigates. Until now, Campbell, who served as vice chair of the House Republican Caucus and who recently voted to expel 3 Democrats who engaged in a gun violence protest on the House floor, had suffered no previous consequences as a result of his actions. That is kind of weird, isn't it? Despite accusations of sometimes extremely vulgar comments, oh boy, we'll have to get the censoring horn out for this one. I don't know, maybe they did. Maybe they were more discreet about it. We'll see how they report it. But despite accusations of extremely vulgar comments and other inappropriate advances, Republicans did not remove the 39-year-old East Tennessee lawmaker from his leadership position, nor from his committee assignments. Nothing at all. But taxpayers are paying for his actions. News Channel 5 has learned that potentially thousands of dollars have been spent to protect one victim, relocating her from the downtown apartment building where she and Campbell both had apartments, shipping her furniture back home in another part of the state, and placing her in a downtown hotel for the remainder of her internship. That's actually, quite serious. I don't know what the amount of money is. That's the least serious aspect of it. I mean, to me anyway. But yeah, they had to essentially evacuate her from her apartment building because that guy was in the same building. It wouldn't be enough to have a restraining order against him. And, I can understand that completely. If she was being intimidated in all of this, or just, to have to experience possibly running into him at the mailboxes or something. It's pretty wild. And for others, even Republicans who don't care about sexual harassment will be upset about taxpayer dollars being spent. Maybe it's being spent on one of their own foibles. They don't really care. Anyway, legislative officials refuse to say how much they've paid out, saying that information is confidential. That's the one thing they're protecting in all of this, the amount of money that was spent. Confronted with the allegations Thursday as he headed to Capitol Hill, Campbell referenced a second intern who was also involved in the investigation. Not sure why. News Channel 5 was previously unaware of that individual's complaint. Interesting. I guess he was trying to conflate the two. He thought maybe if he talked about the other intern that he bothered to some lesser degree, they would think that was the one. This is his response here. I had consensual adult conversations with two adults off property, he insisted. So he was harassing them away from the Capitol building. So it's okay in his mind. I think conversations are consensual once that is verbally agreed to. If I choose to talk to any intern in the future, it will be recorded. Probably just because he wants to save it for himself. Anyway, but a 4-member ethics committee composed of 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats came to a different conclusion, according to a memorandum dated March 29th that was sent to House Speaker Cameron Sexton, who's in trouble all by himself for maintaining a lavish home in Nashville while saying, I need to be paid my per diem to travel back to a house I don't really live in back in my district. Anyway. Based on the completed staff investigation, the Ethics Subcommittee finds that Representative Campbell violated the policy against workplace discrimination and harassment, the memo says. And the memo is embedded here in, at least page 1 of it is. But the upshot of all of this, it goes on to say that, quote, discrimination and harassment in any form will not be tolerated unless no one, makes us tolerate it anyway. Then we'll tolerate it. But concluding that no further information concerning this complaint will be released, which is to say that it in fact will be tolerated. That's pretty amazing. Under the Tennessee General Assembly's own rules, however, quietly placing that vaguely worded memo in a representative's personnel file is the only action that the Ethics Subcommittee can take. That's not that they can choose to take, but that they can take upon a finding that he has engaged in improper conduct. They really should change that rule. Ethics Subcommittee members are also barred from publicly discussing their proceedings. Campbell had represented House District 3 in Northeast Tennessee, which includes Johnson and part of Carter, Hawkins, and Sullivan counties. He served in the State House from 2010 to 2012, and he was reelected again in 2020 and 22. A self-described promoter, I'm not really sure what that's even supposed to mean, he gained national attention earlier this year when, during debate over a bill banning drag shows in public places, he asked if that legislation would also prohibit a, quote, bra and panties match by wrestlers at a county fair. And it should, because what the hell are you doing having that at the county fair? There's children present. Anyway, he voted to expel the so-called Tennessee 3, arguing, if you were in court and behaved like those 3 did, you would have been found in contempt of court. So, okay, he found that just ludicrous, I guess, and they just had to go, whereas he can hang around and ask about, can we have bra and panties wrestling matches at county fair. Legislative interns are generally students from Tennessee colleges and universities. News Channel 5 is withholding the name, exact age, and university of the victim in the sexual harassment investigation to protect her identity. The woman declined to comment for this story, but in an email given to News Channel 5 Investigates by a family member, the victim provided a detailed account to officials at her university about her experiences with the Republican leader for credit. So there you go. For example, after seeing her and another 19-year-old female intern, of course now he's saying 19, she's adult, 19-year-old female intern entering her apartment at the nearby Capitol Towers, the woman describes how Campbell later, quote, made comments about how he was in his apartment imagining that we were performing sexual acts on one another and how it drove him crazy knowing that was happening so close to him. Which is amazing on multiple levels, not just the harassment level, but it's not happening at all close to you or anywhere else. I don't think. I mean, I guess that's the implication here. But even if it was, you're just weird and creepy. But how about that? It's driving me crazy knowing how this is happening so close to me. It's not happening close to you. You were already crazy. You're driving yourself crazy. I uncomfortably explained that that was not happening, she recounts, and he insisted that he knew it was and asked me to tell him about it. Buy a magazine, dude. I explained that she's my friend. I explained the normal course of events in a day. I have people that I associate with. One of them's a roommate. We share an apartment so that we don't have to pay as much in rent as it would cost to do it entirely by ourselves. It's an economic arrangement. I didn't realize that was going to be so arousing for you, but maybe you should get a therapist. I explained that she's my friend, and he proceeded to describe how sexually attractive he finds her, referring to the 19-year-old intern. And by the way, that's also a great pickup line. Your friend is so hot. Anyway. That 19-year-old female intern is believed to be the second person who complained. In response to News Channel 5's questions, Campbell denied that any such conversation ever occurred. That's not true, he insisted. Well, neither is your idea about what they were doing in their apartment, but what the hell. News Channel 5 investigates asked, so she's just making that up? Yes, he said quietly. I don't know whether it was quiet or not. There's video here. We could hear how it was actually said, but we'll take their word for it. The woman's email said Campbell repeatedly made comments about wishing, quote, he had someone with whom he could just cuddle, and how, quote, he is very, very lonely. And I'm sure that's the case, and it's very sad, but, well, too bad. You can't do that with the interns at the Capitol when you are an elected representative. And really, when you're a grown adult, just leave the interns alone. On March 15th, the victim recalls, she went to his apartment to return a wrench that she had borrowed. He proceeded to ask how many men I've slept with, says the email to university officials. I told him 0, and he insisted that I was lying and told me not to lie. Then he proceeded to ask how many women I've slept with, and he said, he bets girls go crazy over me. Well, guys do. You're crazy. How's that? Then the victim says Campbell offered to give her cannabis gummies. Why? To see her tattoos and piercings. I told him absolutely not, and he begged me for several hugs. Her email says. I was getting progressively more afraid and uncomfortable. He then reached out his hand toward me and grabbed me around my neck. Oh my God, and you should have bashed his head in with the wrench he loaned you. I recoiled and said I felt sick and immediately left. That was the last night I ever spoke with or saw him. I blocked his number after that. He should never have had that to begin with. Speaking to News Channel 5 Investigates, Campbell also denied all of those allegations. Again, I had consensual conversations. We can actually hear his voice. Maybe I should cue that up. That were agreed to. It doesn't sound like they were agreed to. And of course, if you have something signed, bring it out. And I'm sure you think you have a verbal agreement. But if you're this into, I got to protect myself legally when I harass the interns, then get it in writing. You said you were going to record the conversations. Anyway, we had, he says, consensual conversations that were agreed to. I mean, he spoke, she answered. There you go. That's consent. Now I can ask about your piercings and tattoos, and I'll give you cannabis gummies if you show me your, all right. Anyway, I'm really surprised that we are here this morning, the lawmaker said. Asked what he meant by consensual adult conversations, Campbell declined to say. Private conversations are supposed to be private, he insisted. So he's not proud of himself and doesn't feel like he got the consent he needed, clearly, to tell News Channel 5 that he begs for hugs and I'm very lonely and I just want somebody to cuddle with and I bet you have sex with everybody and why won't you tell me about it? All of a sudden he's ashamed of his private conversations. I mean, I can understand that, but then you should just own up to what you're doing. I don't want to reveal the contents of all my conversations, but I guess, if it's inappropriate, don't have it. Anyway, still a few days after the incident, at the urging of a fellow intern, the victim complained to legislative officials who began an investigation. According to the victim's email to university officials, she was, quote, informed that Representative Campbell admitted fully to his guilt. He wouldn't do it on camera, but at least there's that. Then embedded is the resignation letter from Scotty Campbell. It's very brief. April 20th, 2023, 2:18 p.m. Central Time. I usually don't put the time in my letters, but when it's a letter of resignation that says, I resign from the Tennessee House of Representatives effective immediately, then I guess you might as well put the time in there so that they know that at 2:19 p.m. Central Time, if he's trying to vote on the floor of the House of Representatives, don't take his vote because he's resigned. By the way, he made that 2 sentences. I resign from the Tennessee House of Representatives, period. Effective immediately, period. That's 1 sentence with a comma, but, you know. Connie Ridley, the Director of Legislative Administration for the General Assembly, provided the memorandum from Campbell's personal file in response to public records requests. But in a series of email exchanges, Ridley insisted that the legislature's policies prohibit her from providing any additional information, including information about the expenditure of state money to assist the victim. No information concerning a complaint, investigation, lawsuit, or the implementation of corrective action will be released to anyone not directly involved in such a matter, Ridley said. The legislature will comply with the confidentiality provisions of the Workplace Discrimination and Harassment Policy. Tennessee lawmakers have faced repeated criticisms over the years for what some see as a lax approach to sexual harassment and discrimination. Yeah, I guess so. All we do is put a letter in your file and don't tell anybody. In April of 2019, Representative Rick Staples, this time a Democrat, in case you were wondering about such things, from Knoxville, was found guilty by the Ethics Committee of engaging in sexual harassment after an unnamed woman said he, quote, grabbed and held on to her waist while standing behind her after he had made an inappropriate comment about her appearance during a visit to the legislature. I love the way they clean up these dirty acts. Staples later resigned from his leadership position with the House Democratic Caucus. In 2017, Republican Representative Mark Lovell resigned after a sexual harassment investigation. Before that, in 2016, sounds like it's happening a lot, the House expelled Representative Jeremy Durham. That was the last expulsion, I guess. A Franklin Republican following an investigation that found he had engaged in misconduct involving 22 women. Not one 22-year-old women, but 22 women of various ages, I assume. Wow. So what's going on in Tennessee? And the answer is nothing good, with the exception of the things that our friends in Tennessee are doing. And the other side is bad. Anyway, there is more. And Radley Balco has the news about it. And so you know that that's going to involve police abuse and police reforms. And he begs you via his Substack, which is also the source of some controversy in the last couple of days. Substack itself, I haven't been paying attention to that Elon Musk problem. I think it's Elon Musk that has that problem. Anyway, meet the nutty Tennessee Republicans. They're nutty. Trying to kill police reform in Nashville. That's the headline on the piece, and it's a Substack. I guess he makes up his own headlines, Radley Balco does. On the same day, the Tennessee House of Representatives voted to expel Memphis State Representative Justin Pearson and Nashville State Representative Justin Jones. The Tennessee Senate waged its own assault on the state's 2 largest cities by a 26-5 vote. The body passed a bill that would force both cities to dismantle the civilian boards that oversee and investigate their police departments. Yes, we can't have anybody overseeing our police departments. The vote, which was largely overshadowed by the expulsions, was merely the latest effort by the far right, rurally dominated Tennessee legislature, that's correct, to impose its will on the cities that drive the state's economy. That's an interesting position and perspective and a good thing to point out in all this. It's also an especially vindictive one. The timing of the bill is telling. Senator Mark Pody, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I'm saying it that way, P-O-D-Y, introduced the Senate version just a few weeks after the murder of Tyree Nichols. I hope I have his first name correct. I mean, it was a widely recognized case. All right. After just a few weeks later, he introduces this bill to get rid of police oversight. And just 2 days after the city of Memphis released the horrifying body camera footage of his death, the House bill was introduced a day before the footage was released. But even then, Memphis officials and Nichols' attorney had spoken publicly about the brutality it depicted. So, as the country recoiled from the gut-churning footage of police officers ruthlessly beating an innocent man to death as he pleaded for his mother. Pody and State Representative Elaine Davis, the chief sponsors of the bill, went to work to make the Nashville and Memphis police departments less accountable and less transparent. And a few months later, 85% of Pody's Senate colleagues went along. The full Tennessee House has yet to vote on the bill, but it has now passed 2 committees by voice vote, and the Republican supermajority is expected to pass it by comfortable margins. The bill is mostly directed at Nashville. The city's Community Oversight Board, or COB, was created in 2019 after voters overwhelmingly approved the idea in a ballot referendum. But screw them, right? It wasn't a close vote. It passed by 18 points. It's one of the most empowered, forward-thinking oversight bodies in the country. And I mean, Radley Balco spends all his time on this subject, so that's an opinion that's worth something. The COB has 11 members and 13 full-time employees who serve as investigators and researchers, and its budget is written into its charter, so it can't be starved of funding. It's actually well designed, right? It has subpoena power as well as an investigative and research arm. It can conduct investigations contemporaneously with the police department. It doesn't need to wait for internal investigations to be completed. Of the board's 11 members, 9 are appointed by community organizations. The only power it lacks is the ability to impose discipline, but it can make recommendations, and given the wide margin by which it was approved and the buy-in from city officials, those recommendations carry some weight. So, of course, Republicans had to set about destroying it as soon as humanly possible. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Mighty OCD is, I guess, upset with, I don't know, are you a big fan of the bra and panties wrestling matches at the county fair? I don't mind that there would be such, I do mind that there would be such wrestling matches, but I don't care to impose that on anybody else. I mean, I think it's weird. but having it at the county fair too. I mean, I know that's like the only social event in some rural counties all year long, but yeah, I mean, you know, geez, Fern is there with Wilbur. I mean, you don't really need that happening. Kids don't need to be exposed to, I'm a big believer in, more or less protecting kids from this nonsense, or just maybe, it's not that I think that they're going to be sexualized necessarily by seeing a bra and panties wrestling match. I'm afraid that they'll be afraid that they're going to be forced to wrestle in their bras and panties when they grow up. I would rather that they not know that that's a possibility waiting out there for them until they get to be older. I don't know. So he sent me the Don't Be a Square thing. What is this from? Is that from Pulp Fiction? Anyway, because she's drawing a rectangle, and I think that's just outrageous. So anyway, don't be a rectangle, everybody. And by the way, noting as far as the Republican or the state taxpayer expenditure to relocate these interns from the previous story, that ain't cheap, a hotel downtown. I'm sure it's not. Neither is relocating all of our furniture and sending our stuff back home. But whatever money they had to pay, I'm sure they would think of as a waste, essentially. So anyway, somebody is bound to be mad about that. Now back to Radley Balco and the Republican work to dismantle some of the more effective, or at least effectively designed, police oversight boards in the entire country in Nashville and where else was it? Which of the major cities? Nashville and Memphis. Just making sure that it wasn't Knoxville or anything. And anyway, where were we with this? Right. Oh, yes. They have to, of course, make sure to destroy this thing because it was well designed and widely supported. Now, despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, the board has been squarely, not rectangularly, but squarely in the crosshairs of police groups and the state legislatures since its inception. Before it even made the ballot, the police union challenged the legitimacy of the petition signatures collected by the board proponents. After the election, the union sued again, and they lost both times. In 2019, the state legislature tried to strip away the COB's subpoena power. The courts intervened, but the legislature's interference forced the city into a compromise. The board can now issue subpoenas, but only with approval from the Metro Council. That's the term for Nashville's city council. Fortunately, the COB has enough support in the city that the police department has been cooperative, and at least so far, the subpoena power hasn't been necessary. But this new bill is an existential threat. Speculation around the city is that Republicans in the state legislature are upset that the Nashville Metro Council thwarted their bid to lure the 2024 Republican National Convention to the city. That sounds just petty and petulant enough to be true. But this legislature has a long history of bullying Tennessee cities, and the oversight bill comes as part of a nationwide wave of red legislatures forcing unwanted culture war policies on blue cities. And don't forget, those are some of those blue spots that I tell you about. Oh, well, it's, we'll cut Tennessee loose, cut Florida loose, let them secede. There's major blue cities in there, man. Of course, Republican leadership in Tennessee can't admit to any of that, so instead, they've pushed an accusation just vague enough that it can't be disproven. During committee hearings on the bill, Republican Senator Richard Briggs claimed that Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, Director David Roush told him that members of city COBs have inappropriately crossed police tape and contaminated crime scenes after shootings by police officers. We're the only oversight board in the state that doesn't have to wait for a police investigation to finish before conducting our own, says Nashville COB Executive Director Jill Fitchard. I'm guessing at that pronunciation. So that accusation could only be about us. But Fitchard says she has no idea what Roush is talking about, because I guess it's a lie. When Senator Briggs said that, it was the first I'd heard of it, she says. No one on our board has ever been warned or cautioned about crossing police tape. We've never had a complaint. Nothing. But maybe he's just another one of those Republican Tennessee legislators who imagines things, who fantasizes that things are happening, and then just states it as a matter of fact. I know this is happening. No, you don't. You're making it up. Like the other guy, except he was at least making up sexual fantasies. You should just stick to that. Roush has never made any such accusation publicly, because he'd get in trouble for it, and there's no public record of any such incident. Fitchard said this is like election stealing. Nope. It won't make the accusation publicly. No evidence that supports it. Hard to say, guy. Fitchard says she has asked Roush's office for more details, but she hasn't heard back. A spokesperson from the office confirmed to the news outlet Bolts. We know Bolts, that Roush and Briggs did have a conversation about the bill, but wouldn't confirm or deny the claim about contaminating crime scenes. Okay. So, good job there, Bolts, by the way, being on the spot. Fitchard says she can only recall one somewhat comparable incident, and that incident played out quite a bit differently than what Briggs described. Shortly after one officer-involved shooting, the officer in question was allowed to walk onto the scene with his FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, that's the union, with his union lawyer, she says. The TBI allowed them onto the crime scene while the deceased was still lying on the ground under a covering. I was floored. I'm a former police officer and a former defense investigator, and I've never seen anything like it. Fitchard says she later brought the incident up at a COB meeting, which appeared to anger the TBI. If Roush and Republican lawmakers are indeed exaggerating or even outright lying to generate support for the bill, it wouldn't be the first time. Nashville TV reporter Phil Williams documented state lawmakers making provably false statements while debating bills and amendments. And wait a minute, wasn't Phil Williams the, same reporter as called out Scotty Campbell in the previous story? Big day for Phil Williams. Good work down there, Phil. See, don't let Tennessee secede. You'll lose Phil Williams. He's doing good work, I guess. And maybe even on a fair and bipartisan basis. I don't know the rest of the body of his work, but these two things seem good. Anyway, the first thing the new bill will do is disband the oversight boards in Nashville and Memphis. Those cities, or any other city in Tennessee, could then reform a, quote, advisory board, but as the name implies, the new boards would lack any real power to investigate. But even an advisory board would still require a 2/3 vote from the city council. Not that you wouldn't get it, but why? Bizarrely, the new law would require such a vote to be taken twice in two separate meetings on two separate days. Like the city council couldn't possibly understand as complex a situation as voting to form a new board. I think they understand that. Just a hurdle to make them do this. As a matter of fact, that word comes up right here. It's an absurd hurdle, but the intent seems clear. Police interests could prevent the formation of even these toothless boards by winning over just 1/3 of a city council. If they failed to round up enough opponents the first time around, they could still persuade or perhaps coerce council members between votes. Second, board or no board, the bill would entrust investigations of police abuse and misconduct in any Tennessee city to the police departments themselves. Wink, wink, always a great idea. That usually means the Internal Affairs Division. How might that work out? Like it does everywhere else in the country, I would guess. Currently, the Nashville Metro PD's Internal Affairs Division is led by a former prosecutor who was reprimanded by the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility in 2016 for failing to turn over exculpatory evidence in a murder case. Pretty huge violation. And we aren't talking about a negligible piece of evidence. One of the state's key witnesses against the defendant in this case had been arrested with the murder weapon. Wow. Well, does anybody really need to know that information? We're convicting this guy based on his possession of the murder weapon. Oh, he didn't possess the murder weapon? Somebody else did? And that guy's a witness against this guy? Yeah, that's evidence you're going to need. This is who Tennessee's legislature believes should be entrusted to investigate the next Tyree Nichols incident, whom they believe should be the sole fact finders after such events. As a final insult, the new bill mandates that if a city does manage to set up a toothless, largely symbolic advisory board, all members of that board must be appointed by the mayor. The reason for this is clear. It puts the entire composition of the board in the hands of a single political official. This official can be more easily targeted, pressured, and retaliated against by the police union. While the bill would immediately disband the Nashville and Memphis boards, it would grandfather in the police board in Knoxville. There's Knoxville in all of this. As it happens, Davis represents Knoxville. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. The Knoxville board is only advisory, though the board, the city, and the police department had been working to give it more authority. Davis's bill will almost certainly quash those efforts, too. This bill will kill the goodwill we've built up between the police and the community, says Seco Franklin, a political science professor whose name I probably mispronounced at Middle Tennessee State University, and a member of the Community Oversight Now group, the activist group most responsible for building public support for the Nashville COB. Franklin adds that the board isn't just about disciplining police. The COB makes policy recommendations, many of which have been adopted by the police department. He says the MNPD has adopted COP. Was that supposed to be COB? But it's a typo. COB, I guess. COB recommendations, not COP recommendations, but COB recommendations for cops on issues like training on how to interact with the hearing impaired, policies, same root, right? On undocumented people, and investigating sexual assault in a way that doesn't re-traumatize victims. Good ideas. Franklin says there have also been cases in which an officer unknowingly or unintentionally caused harm, and the board addressed the complaint not with discipline for the officer, but with guidance and advice on how to better handle similar situations in the future. It isn't always about punishing police officers, he said. It's about building a better police department. They should be for that. Franklin also points to a benefit that's less obvious but critically important. The Nashville COB, I guess, is, they didn't put that in there. The Nashville something is one of the few government entities in which the interests of law enforcement, prosecutors, racial justice, and civil rights activists, the defense bar, and other typically antagonistic groups regularly interact and work together. There's value in having a forum in which all these disparate groups can sit down, talk to one another, and work toward a common goal. It builds trust, he said. The Memphis board, called the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, or CLERB, CLERB, doesn't really work, but that's what it looks like. Now, that's been around since the 1990s. It has been chronically underfunded and understaffed, and it only has the power to investigate incidents or complaints after they've first been investigated by the police department. The CLERB has subpoena power in theory, but subpoenas must be issued through a member of the board who also sits on the city council, and only the city council member can question the subpoenaed witness. After Nichols' death, some civic leaders in Memphis pushed to broaden the board's subpoena power and provide it with more funding. This new bill would stop that from happening too. Davis claimed in a recent committee meeting that the purpose of her bill is to strengthen the relationship between the citizens and law enforcement agencies. That's exactly what the Nashville COB was doing, and now she wants to destroy it. So there you go. But now, I guess if you wanted to take a quick look, well, it's not that quick, but he runs through who are these people who are trying to pass these bills. These are the distinguished legislators who know what's best for Tennessee's cities. At the heart of these paternalistic bills from red legislatures mandating policies on blue cities is the assumption that cities like Nashville and Memphis are incapable of governing themselves. Wink, wink. They're full of blah people. That's the problem. That they require the wise counsel of seasoned legislators to temper the rowdy socialist impulses of urban activists. You know what they are, and I don't see a black face among this group. So, let's take a closer look at the august statespersons behind this effort to gut police oversight. The people who believe their own judgment should supplant the will of 60% of Nashville voters. And this is a great suburbs, frightened white people in the suburbs versus scary black people in the cities situation here. A great example of this terrible thing. Anyway, we can start with Senator Mark Pody, the one we heard about before, the chief sponsor of the bill in the state Senate. Pody represents Wilson County, directly east of Nashville. His district went for Trump by 37 points in 2020. Pody is a proponent of, I was going to say prominent, but I don't know how prominent he is, a proponent of Trump's Stop the Steal lie, and personally paid for other right-wing Tennesseans to travel to Washington, D.C. to protest on January 6th. He is one of several state Republicans who tried to prohibit same-sex marriage in Tennessee by nullifying the Supreme Court ruling that such bans are unconstitutional. According to our local Alt Weekly, he, quote, believes he's on a mission from God, oh boy, to stamp out same-sex marriage. Pody has also introduced one version of the state's various bills that would effectively prohibit transgender people from using public bathrooms, because he's got a heart. Anyway, in a hearing for the COB bill, Pody claimed that because of oversight boards, police officers in Tennessee feel as if they are, quote, under a microscope. Prior to last January, the Memphis Scorpion unit had been subject to numerous brutality complaints. Those complaints went nowhere. So I suspect that Tyree Nichols would disagree with Pody that the officers who beat him have been unfairly scrutinized. Unfortunately, Nichols is unavailable for comment. Next up is State Senator Janice Bowling, a co-sponsor of the bill. I feel like we've heard her name before, maybe in the expulsion debates. I don't know. She represents a South Central district of Tennessee that went for Trump by 52 points in 2020. In 2021, Bowling, too, tried to push a backdoor ban on same-sex marriage, and it failed after Memphis, a majority black city, removed a statue of early Ku Klux Klan leader, slave trader, convict lessor, and massacre perpetrator Nathan Bedford Forrest in a public space. Bowling introduced legislation to withhold state funding should any Tennessee city try to remove similar racist monuments in the future. That's extremely important. We must cut their funding because they have fewer statues. Yes, that makes so much sense. The problem, according to lawmakers like Bowling, is that such removals are illegal without prior approval from the Tennessee Historical Commission. 2 years later, when said Historical Commission recommended that a bust of Forrest be removed from its place of honor at the state capitol, Bowling led an effort to fire all 29 of the commission's members. Okay. Bowling, too, to no surprise, I guess, pushed Trump's stolen election lie. After the 2020 election, she tried to prohibit early voting. About 70% of Tennessee voters cast early ballots in 2020. How do you like that? It's one of the few bright spots in the state that ranks in the bottom 5 for voter participation. But because Democrats may do slightly better in early voting than in election day voting, politicians like Bowling claim it must be corrupt. Bowling is a COVID truther as well and has falsely argued that the vaccine causes, quote, genetic modifications. She even tried to prohibit Tennessee from vaccinating willing teenagers and helped get a state public official fired over the issue. Finally, maybe that's how we know her. Remember that, I got to get the censoring horn ready. That batch bonkers story about schools providing litter boxes for children who, quote, identify as furries. That was Bowling. Now that rings a bell. Maybe that was it. Although, that happened in so many places, I guess, I don't know. Maybe the name is just familiar from other reasons. Like, I once went bowling, so maybe that's it. Anyway, next, the final sponsor of the review board bill in the state Senate is Senator Joey Hensley. You'll want to buckle up for this one. Holy mackerel, it's worse. Hensley is a proud member of the group Sons of Confederate Veterans and, like Bowling, wanted to fire everyone on the Historical Commission after the removal of the Nathan Bedford Forrest bust, or I don't know whether they ever removed it or not, but the recommendation certainly. Hensley was also a sponsor of Tennessee's original Don't Say Gay bill, making him something of a trailblazer of bigotry. The bill was ruthlessly mocked by national media outlets 10 years ago. Wow, before this nonsense became a mainstream position of the Republican Party. Gosh. Hensley once sponsored a bill named for Milo Yiannopoulos, the racist, quote, formerly gay, right-wing firebrand moron who became a MAGA darling for his unrepentant bigotry, then fell out of favor when he sorta endorsed pedophilia. Hensley also sponsored a bill that allows mental health professionals to refuse to treat gay people, which is now law in Tennessee, and another that would have terminated parental rights for non-heterosexual or unmarried parents of children conceived through artificial insemination. That one failed. Oh my gosh, parents' rights? Are you kidding? He also once tried to create an exception for feminine hygiene products to the state's annual income tax holiday. Wow. So there was income tax holiday, and he was like, no, we should have a carve out so that we are still taxing feminine hygiene products. Why in the world? I mean, we need higher taxes. All of a sudden, this Republican has to say. Okay. Hensley, a stalwart defender of family values, yeah, I'm sure, has been married and divorced 4 times. He likes families. One of his ex-wives briefly took out a protection order against him for domestic abuse after alleging he had hit her with his car. I guess he can introduce a bill to make that legal next. I've sometimes made the joke on Twitter, Radley Balco, our author here, says that one of the fun things about living in Tennessee is that when someone asks you about the elected Republican doctor who was having an affair with and illegally prescribing opioids for his mistress, I'm thinking here, of course, you're supposed to think of Scott DeJarle, but instead you can plausibly reply, you'll have to be more specific. There are 2 elected Republican officials in our fair state who check all of those boxes, and Hensley is one of them. Hensley also checks 2 more. The woman with whom he was sleeping was one of his nurses and also happens to be his second cousin. Wow, I wish I had some banjo music to play here. If you're wondering, the other elected Republican doctor who was sleeping with and allegedly prescribing opioids to his mistresses, I'm sorry, plural intended, is Scott DeJarle. I wasn't wondering, I knew. In his case, 2 of the women with whom he had affairs were patients, 3 were co-workers, and 1 was a pharmaceutical rep. The adamantly pro-life DeJarle was also recorded pressuring his ex-wife and one mistress/patient to get an abortion. DeJarle has since won higher office, and he's now a member of the U.S. Congress. Hensley's district went for Trump by 49 points in 2020. Finally, there's Tennessee State Representative Elaine Davis, the chief sponsor of the House version of the bill. Davis was only elected last year and thus hasn't had yet the chance to accumulate the sort of stellar record her Senate counterparts have, but she's off to a great start. Her campaign benefited in part from a flyer in the that the state Republican Party sent to voters in which a photo of her opponent was altered to make him look more Jewish. That'll work. Davis did introduce a House version of Bowling's bill to eliminate early voting, but then in a display of moderately good judgment that may handicap her ability to climb in the ranks of the party, she quickly thought better of the bill and withdrew it. These good readers are the elected officials who believe Tennessee's cities are incapable of governing themselves. Let's find out about this other. So Knoxville Republican Davis wins House race marked by allegations of anti-Semitism. Who was she running against here? I guess Eddie Manis was the name of the. Eddie Manis was a departing Republican who held that seat. Elaine Davis was running to win his seat. It was Democrat Greg Kaplan who was targeted with this. And it doesn't look like she really needed to do that. Looked like a fairly conservative district, but I guess I don't know exactly what they're. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the mailer, and I guess I'm just saying I don't really understand that it makes him look any more or less Jewish. It just makes him look bad because it's a bad angle and a bad photo, but maybe there's something more to it. I don't doubt it. I'll say that. Okay, so there you go. That's what's wrong with Tennessee. Of late, anyway. There are other states that we can round up. As a matter of fact, maybe on our run up to the top of the hour break, we'll read that Heather Cox Richardson entry in her Substack, Letters from an American, that rounds up all of, a couple of different incidents, most of which I think by now we've heard of, and tries to make a larger connecting point here. Don't know if I agree entirely with the point, but here it is. There were a whole bunch of seemingly unrelated stories in the news that all seem to point to an important theme. Josh Dawsey and Amy Gardner of the Washington Post reported that lawyer Cleta Mitchell, I have this story still sitting separately, who was deeply involved in Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election, you remember her, this weekend told Republican donors that the party must restrict access to the vote for young voters. Gen Z voters were the key element in providing the extraordinary 11-point victory for pro-choice Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate Janet Protasewicz, and they are central to the movement to enact gun safety legislation. So, of course, we have to expel them from Tennessee legislature. Far from being ostracized for her attempt to overthrow our democratic system, Mitchell is advising the Republican National Committee. In her presentation, she declared, our constitutional republic's survival is at stake. We got to get rid of voting in order to keep our constitutional republic. Dawsey and Gardner appear to have gotten their information from someone who was there. In Georgia, the fake electors who prepared a false set of electoral votes for Donald Trump in 2020 have begun to turn on each other, while also accusing the lawyer who represented them, 10 of them, of failing to inform them of immunity offers. That's another major mistake. Now, here's a story you may have heard already, but we haven't covered yet. An arbitration panel ordered MyPillow Chief Executive Officer Mike Lindell, who was also deeply involved in Trump's crusade to overturn the election, to hand over a $5 million payment to an expert who took him up on his challenge to prove that his data did not reflect the 2020 election. Prove Mike wrong challenge, I think, right? According to Lindell's deposition in the case, he only offered the money to draw attention to his accusations, and he did not expect anyone to meet his criteria. That's a serious misunderstanding of everything there is. The law, challenges in general. I didn't think anybody would win, so I offered it. Well, you can't just do it. Anyway, Robert Zeidman, a software developer, did. He sued for the money and won, saying that he is a conservative Republican, but wanted to call out election lies. Lindell had no idea that anybody could prove him wrong because he's crazy. He doesn't understand. I mean, I love that they brought that into a judicial context where somebody can say, yeah, we can actually determine definitively that you are wrong here. You said you would pay $5 million if someone proved you wrong, and he did it. The vice chair of the Republican caucus in the Tennessee House of Representatives resigned today, effective immediately. We all know this story of Scotty Campbell and his sexual harassment charges. So she brings it. That's how I first became aware of it. Now we skip down further to Judd Legum's discovery that Tennessee House Speaker Cameron Sexton appears to be living in Nashville, although he represents a district 2 hours away, and has raised questions about whether Sexton is legally in office. Then the story we discussed briefly yesterday about Matthew Kaczmarek and his hiding his authorship of that law review article. It turns out that there's, on top of that, just a little bit more. He also did not disclose that he had given at least 2 interviews with Christian talk radio about his right-wing opinions about abortion, gay rights, divorce, and the sexual revolution, although he was required to do so. Kaczmarek said he didn't recall the recordings, but Senator Lisa Murkowski said, you want to talk about the ultimate bait and switch? I feel like I got duped. I feel like I voted for somebody based on what had been presented to me, and now you do this? That's totally, totally wrong. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. By the way, Mighty OCD assures me that the "Don't be a square" comments was about the 420 thing. Am I not being up to date on, or not being the kind of person that would immediately realize, hey, it's 420 after all? That's good cover. I mean, I'd stick with that story too. Now that everybody knows that you're like one of those bra and panty wrestling freaks, I'd go with that story too. All right. I guess that's probably the case. But, I get the sense that, he wouldn't deny saying, there are consenting adults who might be interested in bra and panties wrestling at the county fair, for God's sake. Terrific. Extraordinary. What are the other things? That's some bra and panties set wrestling thing, some pig, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I guess some more Charlotte's Web references. What other well-known literature about county fairs do we have to go to on this? Anyway, so big thanks to Senator Lisa Murkowski, who feels deeply concerned that she's been duped by Matthew Kaczmarek. I assume that maybe at some point Susan Collins will do the same, and then they'll both look around and scratch their heads and wonder what things could be done. But of course, the reality is very little. Nothing. The remedy is impeachment, but let's see you get the votes together. Anyway, what else do we have? This still from Heather Cox Richardson's roundup here. On Tuesday, David French of the New York Times reports that Dominion Voting Systems won a substantial victory. We know about that, of course, over the Fox Corporation that supports the Fox News channel. Dominion sued Fox for defamation after its hosts lied about Dominion as part of their support for Trump's attempt to overthrow the results of the election. In the run-up to the settlement, Dominion appeared already to have proven that Fox News Channel hosts had lied, but Dominion's claims for more than $1 billion in damages in future earnings were weak, French argued, since Dominion had earned just $118.3 million between 2017 and 2019. So, I guess in that light, it's true then to go ahead and say, well, a $787.5 million settlement was a major victory. Right, so 2 years worth of profits ordinarily represents $118 million. They get another $787 million now. I guess you might wonder about where the $1.6 billion figure came from, but what the hell? I've seen worse. And, of course, they were probably saying, well, this will cause us long-term damage. And they were right, unless they fought back and won in the way that they did. Meanwhile, the process of discovery badly damaged any credibility the Fox News Channel claimed, as its hosts privately disparaged the claims they made on air. And Fox is still on the hook for that discrepancy. Another voting machine company, Smartmatic, is suing Fox News. Also, Fox hosts Maria Bartiromo and Janine Pirro, plus former Fox host Lou Dobbs and Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani, this time for $2.7 billion. Finally, a devastating piece today, that'd be yesterday, by Jay Kirk in the New York Times, told the story of the crime scene investigators who documented the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14th, 2012. That's the one that Greg was telling you about yesterday, where a gunman you know about the story of Sandy Hook, obviously. I don't need to retell that. But the story she's talking about recounted the trauma the investigators endured as they cataloged the massacre. I was sort of wondering, what is this one doing in her collection? That story, along with the details of the lives and deaths of the victims, shed light on the reality of gun deaths that has usually been obscured in an attempt to protect the victims' families. Now, this is where she gets around to her thesis here. It hit me as I read through all this news that a key theme here, and remember, Greg said we had a theme yesterday, but this is a different theme. The theme here seems to be a new shift toward transparency and accountability. It jumps out at me that people are talking to lawyers and to the press about illegalities, irregularities, and in the Sandy Hook case, horrors that in the past they have kept quiet. That's the only way. I now I see the connection to the Sandy Hook thing, although it's a little tenuous, but it's an interesting observation. Now, whether it comes from disgust at the excesses of those who are attacking our democracy or from fear of the law, that transparency reminds me of the pivotal importance of McClure's magazine in the early 20th century. She's going a little historian nerdy on us here. Reformers had expressed philosophical concerns about the concentration of wealth and power at the top of American society for decades. But those concerns could be ignored until the investigative journalists working for McClure's began to explore the specifics of political corruption and its cost to ordinary Americans. Dismissed as muckrakers by politicians, those journalists nonetheless helped to shift the weight of social value from keeping secrets to spilling them. When that shift happened, the walls protecting the country's entrenched leaders crumbled fast. So, I guess that's a hopeful note for us. Interesting, don't you think? And there's a lot of, you're told not to read the comments section here, but I will just point out here that, there's some nice commentary here about the brilliance of having pulled together those disparate stories. Although most of the first couple of stories all fit together pretty nicely, I guess, from a political context. We read them in that context during the week. Grafting on the Sandy Hook story makes for another interesting observation, I thought. A good kind of thing to add to a Friday, if you ask me. All right, back to Pocket. Let's see what else I have put away for you. There are a lot of weird things. Oh, right. Now might be a good time to, I guess we got more states to tour here. And it's more than just Michigan. So let me just, I thought this was kind of an interesting, random item to throw into the mix from Hunter over at Daily Coast. We'll make a stop in another state. We're in Minnesota now. Raising the dead, apparently. A bridge too far for this Minnesota Republican, Hunter tells us. And, we're looking at Senator Eric Lucero, and he's wearing an unusual, I was going to say bright yellow, but I mean, I guess it's sort of pastel-ish. I can't tell from the photo, but a yellow, sport coat here that, it's rather striking. And, here's what Hunter has to say about this guy, Eric Lucero. Minnesota State Senator Eric Lucero, a Republican, unveiled the newest Republican plan to protect our children. And it's such a doozy that it really can't be explained by anyone but the man himself. So, take it away, Senator. And embedded here is Aaron Rupar's tweet embedding the video of Eric Lucero explaining his new plan to protect our children. And I don't know how long the video, 2 minutes. So I can't play the whole thing, but we'll rely on Hunter for a summary. He says of the full 2.5 minutes, that's a yikes and a half. Lucero here is promoting his proposed amendment to HF 1999, Amendment A1, which the Chiron here helpfully identifies as, quote, prohibiting funds to be used for any activities related to the occult, divination, necromancy, I don't know how you pronounce that actually, soothsaying, in case, any Greek tragedies are going on. This is interesting. The presumable typo of Santanism, which, you and I would probably identify as Satanism. Also in here, pedophilia. Just throwing that in here. Occult, divination, necromancy, soothsaying, Satanism, pedophilia. One of these things is not like the others, but, in their mind, it's all the same. We'll assume that Santanism is a typo, but this is Minnesota, and you never know what sort of weird Minnesota grudges you're going to run into up there. What the banana-coated Republican was proposing was simple enough. He doesn't want state funding to be used for any form of, quote, art that could be used to, quote, channel any of those things. And I guess here a long quote from the video, I think. Sin is real. Sin. S-I-N. Although this is from Minnesota, so I don't know how he says it, but we could listen to the video. We can find out for ourselves. Sin is evil. Sin can exist in any institution. Okay. And we need to work hard as the Minnesota Senate to protect our young, vulnerable children's minds against these terrible, wicked, evil practices like bra and panty wrestling. I would have included. And unfortunately, because all humans are subjected to potentially being corrupted by sin, we need to examine all institutions to prohibit such funds. There are practices out there that seek to groom and corrupt the minds of young children to engage in sexual perversion, and some of them are elected Republican state legislators. And those wicked people manifest themselves in many different areas of our society. I'm ready to, get a search warrant for this guy's crawl space. One of those areas that they have manifested themselves is in the areas of the arts. And I want to make sure that taxpayer dollars do not fall into the hands of these wicked, vile people that push sexual perversion, gender confusion, that might come to our capital and in displays of abomination parade themselves around the rotunda. And I do not want pictures, plays, theater, sculptures, or any other type of art to be used to channel the occult, to promote the occult, or any of its variations, Satanism, which he spells correctly here, and the wicked, evil practice of grooming young children such as pedophilia. He's got some general concerns, let's say. Now, Hunter begins, it goes without saying that religious conservatives believe more strongly in the occult than anyone else in America. Not even Satanists believe in Satan as much as Midwestern Christians do. To hear the Lucero sect of America, there's a witch in every attic. And you should search his attic as well, by the way. And a free demon possession doled out in 2 of 5 McDonald's Happy Meals. Probably. It also goes without saying that Banana Dude here is also quite vigorous in his belief that gender confusion and necromancy are essentially the same problem, which is remarkable. Is that the word we're looking for? The one we were censoring before. It's batched. That word for it is batched. And by the way, a good time here to bring up our other fun. I wish I had more space and soundboard for our other fun censorship sounds that I've been using in the podcasts. If you're not listening to the podcast regularly, I recommend it. We also have some other fun noises that can be used to make our weird obsession with getting rid of those words that much more fun. Anyway, the man's intent is clearly to punish the, quote, vile people that believe that, quote, gender confusion might be a thing. The people who come to his office to parade around the rotunda, but according to him, these people are indistinguishable from pedophiles, Satanists, Ouija board purchasers, and other people who attend certain plays. That is not, however, why we are here today. We are here because Minnesota State Senator Eric Lucero is yet another Republican who claims to support small government and hate government overreach, only to like government overreach just fine when it comes to retaliating against groups he doesn't like. I'm referring here, of course, to necromancers. Lucero is full of big talk, listing out occupations and beliefs he defines as evil while omitting a whole lot of evils that he's apparently just fine with. And it's probably notable that while his little speech was full of buzzwords like gender confusion and grooming, his actual amendment went heavy on prohibitions against the occult, divination, and necromancy. And again here, I don't know whether it's necro, but who cares? Doesn't matter that much, and maybe it's even both. You're not allowed to, quote, channel any of those things in art. If Lemon Twist here has his way, no raising the dead, no communicating with the dead, or asking the dead for lottery numbers. So, party's over, everybody. If you are going to do any of those things, the state is strictly banned from providing funding for your, quote, activities. You will raise the dead on your own dime, Minnesota necromancers, but the taxpayers won't be putting up funding for it. Sinful, slutty states like Pennsylvania may be willing to hold public ceremonies that use groundhogs to predict 6-week weather patterns, but there will be no Punxsutawney Phil in Minnesota. That's divination and devil worship. Bucktooth, rat-furred devil worship. That's right. There will be no public performances of Hamlet in Eric Lucero's Minnesota, and no Midsummer Night's Dream. Hamlet is unmistakably a story of the occult, complete with a talking ghost. Midsummer, well, that's absolutely riddled with fairies. Neither of these plays is the sort of thing Banana Fitz here wants to expose Minnesota children to. It goes without saying, of course, that the 1990 Patrick Swayze film Ghost is out. Those damn Narnia books that were omnipresent in school libraries will finally be put under lock and key. That might actually be true. The Wizard of Oz was devil worship to begin with. And Sesame Street is talking, and its talking animal monster things were already on thin ice for decades for promoting math. Lucero's amendment doesn't just strip funding for actual divinations and necromancy, but any, quote, art attempting to, quote, promote those things. Handing out Halloween candy on state property would appear to be a violation. It's not clear whether state vehicles are allowed to stop for street crossing or trick-or-treaters, or whether the extra 20 seconds spent not running them over would count as promoting whatever it is those children are dressed up as. And yet, none of that is as enraging as Lucero's demand that actual divination and necromancy be stripped of state funding. Do you know how hard it is to make ends meet as a necromancer? Do you have any idea? When my grandfather died in 1972, 1987, and 2004, the funeral and disinterment costs alone would have bankrupted my grandfather if it wasn't for her NEA grants. Lemon Pledge here is also making no attempt to distinguish between actual necromancy or spirit raising and the merely attempted kind. This is the sort of thing that is enraging to professional necromancers. The notion that 3 drunken college students lighting a few candles before dusting off an old Ouija board is equivalent, in the state legal code, to the successful summoning of a hellhound, or Elvis riding a hellhound, is like saying your dog dragging his ass on your front lawn is equivalent in spirit to you building a 2-lane paved highway from Wadena to Pine River, if I've pronounced those city names correctly. But what about CPR? Does Lucero, or whatever his name is, I've forgotten already here, intend to withhold public funds for CPR training? If not, where does he intend to draw that line instead? Actually, that might be a good question, because this guy's a loon. In much the same way that, I don't doubt that there are probably people out there who say for religious purposes, I would prohibit CPR. God wanted that person's heartbeat to stop and you're interfering. In much the same way that pandemic pseudo-experts are popping out of the woodwork to tweet-splain gain-of-function research to the top biologists in the world, Minnesota Republicans are now attempting to pass laws premised on an understanding of the occult that would lump performances of Hamlet in with gender confusion and ninth-order magic circle construction. It's the same anti-science, anti-book-learning nonsense we've always gotten from state Republicans. I'm not saying you need to have successfully reanimated a corpse before you're allowed to even weigh in on these things. But it's notable that Lucero was apparently unable to find even one professional necromancer or spiritologist to solicit testimony from. It is, of course, an uncomfortable subject for most, but necromancers are, perhaps more than any other professional researchers, working for the good of mankind. Famous necromancers like the very wealthy Peter Thiel are quite literally researching the methods of immortality. They want to go beyond current medical science to explore post-medical possibilities. And I don't doubt that he would take money from him. Necromancers are, in any other context, precisely the sort of Americans that Republicans are constantly telling us to emulate. They are accomplished bootstrappers, building their businesses from the ground up. And I mean, really, even from below the ground, I would say. 6 feet down. They are not just pro-life, but they are actually willing to do something about it, which is something that few Republicans can themselves claim. They are looking beyond hot-button issues such as school lunch funding or food stamps programs to ask larger questions. Do humans really need food at all? Necromancers are first and foremost, however, among the most aggressive of job creators. No matter what your educational level or what your professional experience you may have had in prior life, they will find a job for you. But no, according to the Minnesota senator, none of this matters. It is the equivalent of pedophilia in his mind. He imagines necromancers and their employers parading around the rotunda in displays of abomination. Listen, Banana Coat, have you ever tried digging a 6-foot hole in the ground? Necromancers work harder in a single night than you've done in your whole off-the-rack life. The good Republican senator really has no good explanation at hand for his belief that state taxpayer money can go to, say, promoting the state's dairy or tourism industries, but not to mom-and-pop Minnesota necromancy shops. He finds some things to be abominations and other things not to be. And Minnesota citizens ought to think long and hard about whether they want to trust the cultural instincts of a man who owns a lemon yellow suit. Perhaps Lucero, and I think it's Lucero, could at least talk to a Minnesota crafted zombie before deciding who is or isn't an abomination. Perhaps he has a few things to learn about how not to be rude. Fortunately for those Minnesota citizens, they have some time to think about that. Lucero's amendment failed, although not by much. 30 senators voted to adopt the amendment prohibiting state funding for necromancers. 34 voted against it. The necromancers won the day. But State Senator Eric Lucero, whatever his name is, does not sound like a man who will take no for an answer when it comes to deciding who in Minnesota is an abomination and who isn't. We can expect to hear from him again. And very likely true. All right, so that's what the hell's wrong with Minnesota. Now, there's lots of things wrong that you should know about in Michigan, as usual. And not only do we have Rosalind McGregor's contribution to share with you, which will come up next, but you may have seen there were other exploits of Michigan Republicans happening elsewhere that made the news. But first, we'll run through what Rosalind has collected for us. Take it away.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Longtime listeners will remember that you spent a lot of time and energy tracking gun fail incidents.
I did.
Fortunately, others like the Gun Violence Archive have taken up the task to keep spreading the news. Recently in Michigan, the Michigan legislature passed and Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed new gun control legislation. I have an article from the Holland Sentinel looking at how this new legislation impacts Michigan counties who have decided to become Second Amendment sanctuaries. Quote, typically speaking, a Second Amendment sanctuary is a jurisdiction that's adopted a resolution declaring gun control laws passed by a higher legislative body, such as the federal government or state legislature, violate the Constitution and won't be enforced in that jurisdiction. An effort to declare Michigan counties as 2A sanctuaries began late in 2019, a response to red flag laws adopted around the country. They enable petitions to a judge to issue an extreme risk protection order against someone and then take away their firearms. With the help of a Democratic state House and Senate, Governor Whitmer recently signed bills that will expand the background check requirement to all firearm purchases and requires gun owners to store firearms in a locked container or using a locking device if they have a child in the house. In addition to the bill she signed, Whitmer repeated her call for lawmakers to send legislation to create a so-called red flag law her way. In Michigan, more than 50 of the state's 83 counties have adopted resolutions to declare themselves sanctuary counties or to reaffirm their support for constitutional rights. But the issue is complicated even when addressed in rural, primarily conservative areas of the state. In northern Michigan's Emmett County, a sanctuary county resolution was considered in 2020, but was ultimately watered down to reaffirm the board's support for the Constitution. Over by the Canadian border in St. Clair County, the board approved a resolution in 2020, but nixed the word sanctuary in the final wording. In Lenawee County, located at the border with Ohio, the board in 2020 approved a resolution supporting the Bill of Rights rather than a measure specific to the Second Amendment. Near Grand Rapids, the Kent County GOP has approached its Board of Commissioners, asking them to approve a sanctuary resolution, but it's unlikely to happen there, Commissioner Chair Sten Stack told Bridge Magazine. Kent County has a rule barring commissioners from adopting resolutions, quote, not directly within the authority and jurisdiction of the county and the Board of Commissioners, unquote, or, quote, for any non-binding statements on policy matters. However, neighboring Ottawa County had a similar rule in place until last week. The Ottawa County Board of Commissioners is now under the control of Ottawa Impact, a political group created in 2020 in response to anger over the county's COVID-19 mitigation mandates. The county board last week voted to rescind a 2021 policy that said that the group exercises limited government power and should only entertain substantive resolutions that pertain to the specific administration or legislative authority given to the board by the state statute. The Ottawa County chairman has indicated that adopting the GOP resolution might be in the works, saying, quote, I think it's great that the board also be able to use their voice on important issues, whether it's the Second Amendment or parental rights or Constitution or whatever the board might take up. The article wraps up with a question, is a sanctuary county designation legally binding? In short, no. The Second Amendment, ratified in 1791, is one of 10 amendments that form the Bill of Rights. When elected officials take office, they swear to uphold the state and U.S. constitutions, which includes the Bill of Rights, meaning reaffirming a commitment to the Second Amendment specifically is redundant. In addition, Michigan laws governing the authority of county commissions state specifically that county boards cannot adopt an ordinance that prohibits gun regulations from the state. That's today's look at local government in Michigan. Back to you, David. Rosalind McGregor signing off.
All right. Thanks again, Rosalind. And I guess just in time. That would fit in right before we had to start our music, and I started worrying about, but I think I actually somewhere found I found the ability somewhere. Hopefully I could find it again, where if we were rolling into the music, but you were still going, I could probably play it just under you and make it sound like you were in studio. That would have been professional and cool. But instead, we'll do things this way and finish up your recording before we start the music. There's more from Michigan, and perhaps we'll get to that after our break, and then maybe dive even further into Pocket and try and pull up some things that have been waiting in the wings, strange stories, different angles, whatever we can do to entertain you on a Friday for just one more half hour. Why not? We'll give it a shot. We'll be back after this 2-minute break, pondering what direction we'll take next. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back. We're here on the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I can already tell that we're going to be tight on time as we get down to the wire here, but let's deliver on the promised additional news from Michigan. I'm going to read from Walter Einenkel's retelling of the story here at Daily Kos. Michigan Republicans, remember them? We were just talking about them. Michigan Republicans go Jerry Springer on each other at a hotel bar. And I have bad news, Walter. We're getting to that stage in life where we're going to be talking to a significant portion of our audience, and they're going to say, I don't understand the reference, who is Jerry Springer? But, the rest of us get it. We olds. And I guess you get to join the ranks of the olds now. Anyway, what the hell are we talking about? We don't really know. Honestly, we don't know what happened here. But as Walter might, and we got this from him here. Police responded to an altercation at a hotel bar in Clare, Michigan. And, it's C-L-A-R-E. So, I don't know. I assume it's Clare, Michigan. That's about as Anglo as I can pronounce it. But who knows? Place names in America are weird. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It was in a hotel bar, and that's what really matters. This wasn't, though, your standard drunken bar altercation, although, as it turns out, it really was. It's just that it involved a bunch of Republican officials, some of whom, more or less by definition, are, in fact, lunatics. Anyway, according to Bridge, Michigan, the people involved are all leaders of the Republican Party in Michigan. Their sloppy altercation came the night before the Michigan GOP's new State Central Committee's first official meeting. So they all gathered and started imbibing alcohol, and hilarity/violence ensued. Police say Kalamazoo Republican Party Chair Kelly Sackett, I'm going to try and keep the names straight here, and Macomb, is that right? How they say it? Or is it Macomb? I never remember, even though it's a very well-known and often discussed county in Michigan. But the Republican secretary there, Melissa Pellis, maybe? P-E-H-L-I-S. Well, Kelly Sackett from Kalamazoo and Melissa Pellis were separated after the two had a verbal argument that got a little bit physical. The nature of the argument seems to be connected to a power struggle going on within the Republican Party of Michigan between supporters of the new QAnon election-denying chairperson for the Republican Party, Christina Caramo, right? And her former buddy, Matthew DePerno. And again, I don't apologize if I'm butchering all the names, except insofar as it bothers listeners who know how the names of places and people are pronounced. But for the most part, I don't care about the players in this one. Anyway, below you can see roughly 2 minutes of video showing the altercation. And yes, it is going viral, so enjoy it. The embedded video here from Bridge, Michigan. Does it say how many people have viewed it if I hover over it? No, I guess it hasn't. But we'll take Walter's word for it that it's going viral. And in the video, you can see Pellis. That's the woman from... Pellis, again, is the... I got to refer back to the scorecard here. She's the one from Macomb, I can never remember, county. That's the secretary of the county party organization. And she's fighting with Kalamazoo Chair Kelly Sackett. But here's Pellis sitting down and a woman leaning on the table next to her, talking with her. Pellis stands up and the two women's voices get louder, with Pellis saying, "I answered your question." Sackett walks over, takes the unidentified woman by the arm and says, "Don't engage." Okay. So Sackett comes in to take the other unidentified woman away from Pellis. Sackett, who was using her smartphone as a drink tray, that's interesting, approaches Pellis from behind. Pellis turns around and Sackett sort of stumbles back. Pellis walks up to her saying, "How many letters did you send out? 22? She repeats the question. Sackett seems to respond, though you cannot hear her. Pellis gets even more in her face and seems to be repeating what Sackett just said to her. "By the power that's invested in me?" Is that what you just said? By the power invested in me? It is at this point that the two are separated by an unidentified man holding a cigar, because that's how you know he's a man, he's holding a cigar in his hand, who walks away with Sackett. Pellis then addresses the larger group Sackett is next to, saying, "You're all going to jail. You're all going to go down." Sackett responds by saying, "You're so effing crazy. Get the F out of here." And, it's taking me a while to sort of unravel who's the crazy in all of this. I can't quite tell. This leads to Pellis repeating the power invested in me thing, adding that Sackett seems to have said that Pellis is no longer a delegate. Sackett is leaning against a man who is sitting down when Pellis gets into her face one more time, and Sackett slaps Pellis's left hand, which is seemingly holding both a phone and a cigarette. "Get your cigarette out of here," Sackett says, knocking both the phone and the cigarette to the floor, which unfortunately wasn't covered in lighter fluid. At this point, Pellis pushes her hand into Sackett's face and knocks her backwards. Another unidentified man appears and starts gruffly yelling, "Now we got a problem. Now we got a problem." I don't know where he puts the emphasis at. Now we got a problem, or now we got a problem. Now we got a problem. Now we got a problem. I don't know. Two other men tell Pellis she has to leave. Bridge, Michigan reports that the 22 letters Pellis was referencing were allegedly sent by Sackett to elected precinct delegates days earlier, which said they had been, quote, removed as a Kalamazoo County Republican Party delegate. Pellis was reportedly responding to what she believed to be a purging of new state Republican chair Christina Caramo loyalists. So Pellis, I guess, is upset with the purging of Caramo loyalists, which I guess means Pellis is something of a Caramo loyalist herself. Matthew DePerno spoke with Bridge, Michigan. He had harsh words for his new party leader and her supporters. Caramo, I'll figure it out eventually. Caramo sycophant, who was there, it appears, to intentionally harass Sackett, said DePerno. I guess there's a word missing here, but okay. An attorney who ran against Kagro for state party chair and is now defending the Kalamazoo GOP in a lawsuit filed by 2 other women forced from the county party's executive committee. There's big internal disputes within the party right now, and Kagro has done nothing to bring the party together, said DiPerno. And how could she after she ran on a platform for chair to divide the party? Her platform was to burn it down to eliminate the people who don't agree with her. Now, if the name Matthew DiPerno rings a vague bell for you, it's likely because the Trump-backed election conspiracist is a key player in a Michigan voting machine security breach investigation. And linking back to the story about that one here at Daily Kos. Responses to the video have been more than a little entertaining. First up is a little case of potato, I don't know what this is. Potato. Well, okay. I don't know if that's just weirdly a typo or a reference to something. But anyway, other people are complaining. Why does she keep saying by the power invested in me? Anyway, by the way, it's vested, they say in their tweet here. And by the way, the phrase is by the power of Grayskull, not by the power vested in me. I don't know if everybody knows that. Not a lot of people know that. Anyway, MSNBC should be taking a page from Fox and reporting on the GOP MAGA riots in Clare and show stock footage of buildings burning and then run the same report hourly for the next year or so. That'd be funny. Others, of course, commenting on how their elected leaders are a room full of sloppy drunks. Me on the sideline holding up what now has become a meme. The sign at a baseball game that says, I just hope both teams lose. All right. That's pretty good. And more of the same. Okay. Well, it's going to be a fun year, 2024 in Michigan, Walter concludes as he closes out the article. That brings you up to speed on what's wrong with Michigan. So let's see, we've been in Tennessee, Minnesota, Michigan. You know, there's more states and all, but I think that's probably enough for today. And now we can go to the weird stories that you don't usually hear covered on, well, hell, anywhere, except for the fact that, of course, we are reading the coverage someone else is providing somewhere, but you have to collect it from all sorts of sources in order to get it all under the umbrella of one podcast, the one true podcast that brings it all to you. This one I think John Shiflett sent to me the other day, if I am not mistaken, from The Verge, and a little bit of a weird tech dystopia kind of a story, I think, here. This is just sort of weird and something to think about for the weekend. It is from, the author here is Nilay, Nilay, Patel, who I guess people were just very excited to find out that he just landed at Mastodon, in case you wanted to follow him. But writing at The Verge, here's the story. It's an AI story, and I never understand the AI stories. But this one I think I get, but only enough to understand that, oh my God, that's another problem. And it's not the Skynet will kill us all problem. That's still out there. But get this, legalisms. I like it. AI Drake, the recording artist. AI Drake just set an impossible legal trap for Google. What the hell is AI Drake? It's the regular Drake, but being used by AI to do something weird and different. Ready? And here we go. The AI Drake track that mysteriously went viral over the weekend is the start of a problem that will upend Google in one way or another, and it's really not clear which way it will go. Here's the basics. I'm already lost. Ready? There's a new track called Heart on My Sleeve by a TikTok user called Ghostwriter877 with AI-generated vocals that sound like Drake and The Weeknd. The song mysteriously blew up out of nowhere over the weekend, the small, uncapitalized, non-proper name weekend, which, well, is fishy for various reasons. The song, it's fishy that the song blew up out of nowhere. Why? I don't know. But the video is now unavailable, and you'll find out why. After the song went viral on TikTok, a full version was released on music streaming services like Apple Music and Spotify and on YouTube. This prompted Drake and The Weeknd's label, Universal Music Group, to issue a sternly worded statement about the dangers of AI, which specifically says that using generative AI infringes its copyrights. Here's that statement from UMG Senior Vice President of Communications, James Murtaugh Hopkins. And here's the excerpt from it. UMG's success has been in part due to embracing new technology and putting it to work for our artists, as we have been doing with our own innovation around AI for some time already. It sounds braggy, but okay. With that said, however, the training of generative AI using our artists' music, which represents both a breach of our agreements and a violation of copyright law, as well as the availability of infringing content created with generative AI on DSPs, begs the question, and that's a phrase that everyone always insists is being used improperly, but I'm not sure here, begs the question as to which side of history all stakeholders in the music ecosystem want to be on. The side of the artists, fans, and human creative expression, or on the side of deep fakes, fraud, and denying artists their due compensation. These instances demonstrate why platforms have a fundamental legal and ethical responsibility to prevent the use of their services in ways that harm artists. We're encouraged by the engagement of our platform partners on these issues as they recognize they need to be part of the solution. Do you see what's going on here? I guess basically what they're saying here is they've essentially fed the sound of the voice and the phrasing and the way somebody sounds into generative AI and said, use that to generate a song, a new song, allegedly, I guess, using this artist's voice. But this is a song now that's, put together and sounds like a song and can be released as a track that sounds like Drake is performing it, but he's not. Is it a deep fake? Is it generative AI? Is it both? I don't know. Is it a Drake tune? No, it's not. What is it? I don't know. But now you start to see what is going on here and what the problems are. What happened next is a bit mysterious. The track came down from streamers like Apple Music and Spotify, which are in tight control of their libraries and can pull tracks for any reason. But it remained available on YouTube and TikTok, which are user-generated content platforms with established DMCA takedown processes. I am told by a single source familiar with the situation that UMG didn't actually issue takedowns to the music streamers, and the streaming services so far haven't said anything to the industry trade publications. Neither has Drake or The Weeknd. It's weird. It does seem like Ghostwriter 977 pulled the track themselves to create hype, especially while the song remained on YouTube and TikTok. But then TikTok and YouTube also pulled the track, and YouTube in particular pulled it with a statement that it was removed due to a copyright notice from UMG. That's what you'll see where it used to be embedded in the story here at The Verge. It now says video unavailable. This video is no longer available due to a copyright claim by Universal Music Group. So that is odd. And this is where it gets fascinatingly weedsy and probably existentially difficult for Google. To issue a copyright takedown to YouTube, you need to have a copyright on something. Now, since Heart on My Sleeve is an original song, UMG doesn't own it. It's not a copy of any song in the label's catalog. That is interesting. But to be able to claim, are they trying to claim copyright in the general sound of Drake's voice, such that if it was a straight sampling of his voice, that would be something. I took a recording that's owned by UMG and used it to create a new thing, and you'd have a dispute perhaps if you actually, created derivative work. But if it's using a recording produced and distributed by UMG, that's something. But if it's not, if it's just using AI to do different words entirely, but in the style and sound of one of their recording artists, that is kind of weird. What do we do with that? Do they own the sound of Drake's voice? I don't know if Drake would agree with that. So what did UMG claim? I mean, I guess for the sake of getting paid, he might agree with it, but I don't know if existentially he would agree that the sound of his voice belongs to a corporation that pays him for it. So what did UMG claim? And I mean, that's really an interesting section all by itself, is like, okay, this video is now missing, but the claimed reason is a copyright infringement, but that can't, under current conditions, be the case. So what do we do? And not only is the video gone, but there's like a lie sitting in its place. What's going on? What did they claim? The reporter here says, I've been told that the label considers the Metro Boomin producer tag at the start of the song to be an unauthorized sample, and that the DMCA takedown notice was issued specifically about that sample and that sample alone. That could be, right? I don't know. I haven't heard the song, but I guess the fact that they, I don't know. I'm not sure what it is that we're talking about even, but they claim that there's an unauthorized sample, direct lifted sample in there, and that's the reason. Now, it's not clear if that tag is actually a sample or is itself AI generated. But YouTube, for its part, doesn't seem to want to push the discussion much further. We removed the video after receiving a valid copyright notification for a sample included in the video, is what YouTube spokesperson Jack Malon, M-A-L-O-N, I don't know, says about the situation. Whether or not the video was generated using artificial intelligence does not impact our legal responsibility to provide a pathway for rights holders to remove content that allegedly infringes their copyrighted expression. UMG has followed up by issuing individual URL by URL takedowns to YouTube as copies of the song pop up, all based on the Metro Boomin tag. I am told by another music industry source that the copy can't really use YouTube's automated content ID system. I'm getting lost in the weeds here, because again, it doesn't own the song and it can't claim it for that system to begin matching it. Oddly, Ghostwriter 977 re-uploaded the track to their YouTube page after the first takedown, and it's still there. Again, there's a lot of fishy stuff going on here. Sounds pretty weird, and I guess I'd have to figure out I'm not certain what I'm talking about here with this Metro Boomin tag. I don't know, can I play that here? How long does it take to play this? 1 minute and 15 seconds. And I'm just not sure what we're talking about here exactly, but I get the general gist of things that they claim that there was an unauthorized sampling going on. But again, that's true. It might have been AI generated. But if it's an AI generated exact, duplicate essentially, or an imitation, I guess presumably they can make that claim. So, have you got all that? I don't. But, okay. Now here's the problem. There's more. If Ghostwriter 977 simply uploads Heart on My Sleeve without that Metro Boomin tag, and I guess when I say tag here, I mean, I don't know what we're talking about exactly. I mean, maybe it's lingo I'm not getting, but it sounds like maybe at the introduction to the video, before the video comes up, I mean, in my mind, the Metro Boomin tag, I don't know what Metro Boomin is. Is that a label? Is that a boutique label within the UMG group or something like that? Anyway, and they may have their own audio tag. Like in the advertising business, you'd be talking about a identifier, maybe much like when you start a movie and there's the 5 different production companies put their own little video tag up in there. Maybe there's an audio tag that goes onto their music, and whether or not that it's not a part of the music, but it goes along with it. And it might be that Ghostwriter 977 either, I don't know whether they sampled it and included it as artistic expression, or whether it was part of a joke, or whether it was meant to confuse people as to the source of the music or what. But if this Ghostwriter 977 uploads Heart on My Sleeve without the tag, they will kick off a copyright war that pits the future of Google against the future of YouTube in a potentially zero-sum way. Google will either have to kneecap all of its generative AI projects, which would be great, including Bard and the future of search, or piss off major YouTube partners like Universal Music, Drake, and The Weeknd? Let's walk through it, but let's walk quickly. The first legal problem with using AI to make a song with vocals that sound like they're from Drake is that the final product isn't a copy of anything. Copyright law is very much based on the idea of making copies. Copyright, right? A sample is a copy, as is an interpolation of a melody. Music copyright in particular has been getting aggressively expansive in the streaming age, but it's all still based on copies of actual songs. Fake Drake isn't a copy of any song in the Drake catalog, so there's just no dead-ahead copyright claim to make. There's no copy. Instead, UMG and Getty Images and publishers around the world are claiming that collecting all the training data for the AI, that's the copyright infringement. That ingesting Drake's entire catalog or every Getty photo or the contents of every Wall Street Journal article or whatever to train an AI to make more photos or Drake songs or news articles is unauthorized copying. That would make fake Drake songs created by that AI unauthorized derivative works. And phew, we're still squarely in the realm of copyright law that everyone understands, or well, at least pretends to understand. The problem, even with that interpretation, is that Google, Microsoft, Stability AI, and every other AI company that are all claiming that those training copies are fair use. And by fair, they do not mean fair as determined by an argument in an internet comments section, but fair as in fair as determined by a court on a case-by-case application of 17 United States Code Section 107, which lays out a 4-factor test for fair use that is as contentious and unpredictable as anything in American political life. I asked Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella about this when I talked to him about the new ChatGPT-powered Bing, and he wasn't shy about it. Look, at the end of the day, search is about fair use, he said. In other places, again, it'll have to be really thought through as to what is the fair use, and then sometimes I think there'll be some legal cases that will also have to create precedent. That's because there is no actual precedent for saying that scraping data to train an AI is fair use. All of these companies are relying on ancient internet law cases that allowed search engines and social media platforms to exist in the first place. It's messy, and it feels like all of those decisions are up for grabs in what promises to be a decade of litigation. It does sound interesting, but I guess that's what the ancient internet law cases are. Well, it's okay, and it's fair use for machines to scrape all the data for the purposes of assembling a search engine that will help people find the original works anyway. But what about for the purposes of creating original works of your own and possibly diverting business clicks, money, or whatever from the actual objects that were used to train and instead to these works from generative AI based on, it couldn't have happened unless they had gained access to and made unauthorized use of all of this data that's out on the internet. But is there anything that's unauthorized once it's out there on the internet? I don't know. So now imagine that you're Google, which on the one hand operates YouTube, and on the other hand is racing to build generative AI products like Bard, which is trained by scraping tons of data from the internet under a permissive interpretation of fair use that will definitively get challenged in a wave of lawsuits. And Google will end up on both sides of it because it owns YouTube. AI Drake comes along, and Universal Music Group, one of the largest labels in the world, releases a strongly worded statement about generative AI and how its streaming partners need to respect its copyrights and artists. What do you do? If Google agrees with Universal that AI-generated music is an impermissible derivative work based on the unauthorized copying of training data, and that YouTube should pull down songs that labels flag for sounding like their artists, it undercuts its own fair use argument for Bard and every other generative AI product it makes. It undercuts the future of the company itself. If Google disagrees with Universal and says AI-generated music should stay up because merely training an AI with existing works is fair use, it protects its own AI efforts and the future of the company, but probably triggers a bunch of future lawsuits from Universal and potentially other labels, and certainly risks losing access to Universal's music on YouTube, which puts YouTube at risk. I asked Google's Malon, and about this dilemma, and he said, it's not up to YouTube to determine who owns the rights to content. This is between the parties involved, and this is why we give copyright holders tools to make copyright claims and uploaders tools to dispute claims that they believe are made incorrectly. Matters that cannot be resolved through our dispute process may ultimately need to be decided by a court. And now I'm way over on my time. I got to play the outro music, and we'll see, can we finish this up, because it's interesting. Well, that's the idea, but copyright claims on YouTube were messy and contentious before the AI explosion, and now there's basically no way for Google to avoid some major litigation here. YouTube only continues to exist because of a delicate dance that keeps rights holders happy and the music industry paid, but the future of Google itself is a bet on an expansive interpretation of copyright law that every creative industry, from music to movies to news, hates and will fight to the death. Because it is death. Generative AI tools promise to completely upend the market for almost all commodity creative work. And these companies are not required to sit back and let it happen. The difference here is that the last time this sort of thing happened, Google and YouTube were disruptive upstarts with killer products and little to lose, and they accepted the litigation from Viacom and everyone else as the cost of winning. Now, YouTube is literally a cable company now, and navigating the thorny world of content partnerships while chasing after AI startups who are much freer to break things will force Google to make almost impossible choices at every turn. How do you like that for something to ponder over the weekend? That's pretty good. Thanks to John for sending that one along. If you don't like that for something to ponder over the weekend, there's always the Blue Moon Spirits Friday show coming up next on Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Shut up, you. I'm trying to tell you about Justice Putnam. All right, well, what's he got in store for you? Oh, of course, we've got Democrats would be wise to follow Michigan's example, but in what way? In standing up to the tyranny of the MAGA minority, which is already imploding anyway. So stay tuned for that, plus his own odd collection of news from around the country and around the world. We'll see you next week.